20th century at Heron High School. He remembers Lee Kabuti. He remembers Mr. Lee. He remembers my brother, Jim Rankino, in the class of 54. And many of you are in this room, and it's very poignant to see all of you, and to see that we've aged, certainly. Jack was a wonderful athlete from the very beginning. When I first talked with him, he talked about his father with his great love, and a great love for the city of Heron. He's a retired educator from Belleville East in Belleville. He also taught at the junior college there in Belleville. He was a longtime coach throughout his series of moving from schools. One of his children was actually born at Heron Hospital, and that's when he used to come home, and it so happened that his beautiful wife gave birth to a baby at our Heron Hospital. That's when we still delivered babies. We're very pleased to have his wife with us today, Carolyn Hall Burke. Her younger brother was in the class of 60, and many of us remember him at Heron High School. Carolyn,
I also have a nephew that's teaching there now.
yes, and his name is?
Matthew Hall.
Matthew Hall is at Heron High School. Thank you for that. Carolyn is not only still beautiful as she was in the class of 53, she was the Heron High School homecoming queen. So we want to Jack and Carolyn, we have one of their daughters with us today, and her husband. And the husband, I thought, was a son of the Burkes. He looks very much like his father-in-law did in his younger years, Lori and Scott Hagley from Webster Grove, Missouri. We have people here today who knew Jack in high school. We have some who worked with him, like Jim Wilcox, who was a Heron native, but he actually got to work with Jack up in the Belleville area. So, Jack is going to speak to us. He's going to pull some...
I didn't work with him.
No, you were at
I
all.
like him though.
You visited with him.
There's a long story.
All right. Jim was band director, and this man was in social studies. So, we're going to turn this over to Jack Burke. We're very pleased that you could come, Jack, and I know you'll pull our heartstrings. We'd like you to talk for about 30, 35 minutes, and then we're going to have a big discussion.
That's almost impossible.
Jack Burke.
And we'd like to remind everyone to sign in before you leave.
During my teaching career, I never talked 30 minutes. My wife will verify the fact that at Sunday morning Sunday school class, I never talked 30 minutes. It's always longer. I'm programmed for 55 minutes before a bell rings. If you don't have a bell, I just may go beyond it. I'm trained to bells. Well, thank you for the opportunity. You've caused me about 30 days going through stuff that I hadn't looked at in 25 years, and it's been on my mind, and it's been a real interesting experience coming up with some of this information. We were looking at, they sent me these pictures. I don't remember this one ever, and this is what the station basically looked like when my father moved into it. But what probably none of you are old enough to remember is that they're in this little bitty picture down in the 400 block of North Park Avenue, across the street from Bob Stotler Lumberyard. There was a gas station and garage. On the very end, if you go down to the south part of end of 400 block at 401, there was a Skelly gas station there, run by Elizabeth Rogers' father, Red Rogers. If you go a building to the north, there was a wholesale house, and I'm talking about 1938. Johnny North ran a wholesale house. The next building was Harold Fisher's tire, battery shop, and gas pump. Then the next building was my father and my Uncle Bill had a garage and did mechanical work, sold gas, and then I just now found the picture I was looking for. I walked back to the back and just happened to thumb through some stuff, and there was a picture of Wallace Photography Studio. And that was the building north of my father's first station. And I always remember that they had a son by the name of Jack Wallace, and that has always stuck in my mind for a long time. And the only thing that's got me a little confused there is it also was a Craig studio. Now, as I told someone ago, I'm not sure whether it was Wallace and then Craig, I think it was, or whether it was Craig and then Wallace. But both those names stick in my mind being there. Now, at that particular station, which most of the time that I remember, my father was selling a product called City Service Gas. And Bill was the mechanic, and my dad was the service person dealing with the cars. They were there when the war started. In 1941, my father was selling Nash automobiles. And the government came in and says, we need those. And they took the Nash automobiles. We ended up, even though it disturbed my mother to start with, we ended up with a 1939. They had confiscated the 1941 models, and Mother was mad because we weren't driving one of those before they confiscated them. But it was for the war effort, and the 39 was an outstandingly good automobile for that period of time. Really a good, we drove it until 48. It was very modern. It had under-seat heater, which also allowed it to have a defroster. Most cars didn't have defrosters. But it had heat in the back, heat in the front, and the back seat folded down. It was a touring car, and the back seat folded down, and you could travel and use that as a bed at night. It also had a newfangled thing. It had a manual overdrive. Little button on it, and you could be driving down the highway and pull that button out, and you could conserve gas. And a lot of cars now have that automatically in the car. My Uncle Bill was into selling Oliver tractors, and he had a few tractors there. Let's see, around my 5th birthday, I was able to get on an Oliver tractor, and these are much smaller than what we have today as for farming equipment. And I was able to start it up, put it in gear, and go about 20 feet forward, put it in reverse, and go 20 feet back. And I used to do that in the garage all the time, back and forth, with a tractor. Of course, those disappeared also, the war. I enjoyed, my mother and I would walk down to the station in the evening before Dad closed, and there was a pinball machine, so that was great fun. There was a great Coke machine there, which we could use. There was a dog that stayed around. Some of you may know a person by the name of Jack Walker. Jack Walker had Great Danes. And things were very nice, but there were some rough times at that time, and they were always afraid of burglars at night and all, so they kept a watchdog. And Jack, the dog's name was, I think, Black Jack, and they called him Jack. And, but anyway, he was a fine dog, and a big dog, and friendly dog, you know. And so it was quite a place to meet people, everybody treated me sort of like you've heard the story where people said they would like to have been the fly on the wall at a meeting or listen to what people were saying or see what they were doing. Well, I was that fly. I was a little kid, but no other little kids were around, and the adults acted like I wasn't around. Whatever they said, they said. Whatever they wanted to do, they did, and these were all young people at that time. see, my father was born in 1910, so he would have been about 30 years old. In fact, this is one of the teams he pitched for. This is a Heron Redmond. And several other people, Other Ladd, and some of the other people in that picture that some of you might have heard of before. But that was 1932. So he was 22 years old there. It's right before he and Mother got married, and I was born in 35. And he and I played a lot of catch together. But the main thing about it was, as I said, I could be around the adults, whether they were playing cards, whether they were wrestling, talking to each other, whatever they were doing. I could be around and they just ignored me. And so there's a lot of things I heard and saw that probably maybe I shouldn't have seen or heard, but that's the way, how do young men act? If their wives are around, how do they act with their wives around? So anyway, that was my beginning as the first station I remember. I mentioned that I was born in 35. There are 3 people who have the exact same birthday as I do, that I've grown up and know about. And one is Elizabeth Rogers, who we went to school together. And she and I were born on the same date. Hunt now, yes, Elizabeth Rogers Hunt. And another one is my wife's cousin, Don Hall, who was from McLeansboro. And he and I played basketball one time at Harrisburg in Harrisburg's new gym. And but the third one, I just found out about something that it has a connection to Heron, and that's why I want to mention this birthday situation. There's one that we've known since 50 years, since 66 or so. Her grandfather and grandmother lived here in Heron. He was a mine manager, and they lived in the house that's been moved to John A. Logan. So if you're familiar with that house, we know a granddaughter whose mother grew up in that house and graduated from Heron High School, as well as one of her aunts. As I was going through this, I mentioned this to her, and in this particular booklet, which was a celebration of 30, 31, 32, 33, and 34, her mother graduated in 29, so she's not in here. But the name was Notman, N-O-T-M-A-N, and the grandfather's name was George. He was the mine manager. And she has an aunt in this book, Mary Notman, who graduated in 33. And I thought, of all the years I've known her, and to come up with that kind of information, it just kind of amazed me about that. And she's been to the house since they moved it and all, and she's been over there to see that. Now, in the process of this period of time, I want to pull in here a couple of people. When I was born in Murfreesboro, at my grandparents' house, 2034 West Pine in Murfreesboro. And my mother was there for a couple of weeks, recovering from a very difficult delivery. And when they came to Heron, they lived at my first residence is like we went right by it this afternoon on West Heron Street. And on the west side of the house, Mr. and Mrs. Fred Clunch, Sr. lived there. Some of you knew Fred Clunch, Jr., and he was running around at that time. On the other side was Suzanne Keener's house. And so my mother got information from Mrs. Clunch. I was a crybaby, very uncomfortable. My mother was trying to go buy a book that somebody had given her. This is the way you raise a kid. And Mrs. Clunch said, "He's crying, he's hungry, stop it. Just stop it and feed him." And I'm forever grateful that she did that. I learned to eat I enjoy eating, and as you can tell, and I have Mrs. Punch. Suzanne's mother, Suzanne was about 2 years old, and Suzanne's mother was younger and fit more into my mother's category for socializing. But that only lasted a few months. Then we moved to 816 North 12th. And that had some really nice neighbors. One was Dr. Henning. And Dr. Henning had something that I enjoyed doing and playing with. We just went by there a while ago. There was a dog pen and a dog house. And Mrs. Henning was very nice. I could go across, I'm 2 years old, and go across the street, climb over a fence, and play with the dog. And they were very nice to me. The fellow across the street from me, Mr. Banks, didn't have any young children. All his kids were in high school. He was a railroader, and when his blind went up on his bedroom, I was across the street. And he was a very nice man, a grandfather to me. That is the house, by the way. Some of you knew Carl Cocatera and Joe Lamartina. That was the house they lived on 12th Street, where I used to go and play with Mr. Banks. And he was a kind, grandfatherly figure and was very, very nice. And one house down was a parent, Dr. Wendell King's wife grew up in that house, and Danny King's grandfather lived in that house. And then the next house was Mr. Cohen, who had a Cohen grocery store there at 800 North 12th Street on the alley. And those people were really, really nice to me because I was running free. I didn't have any young people to play with, and so that worked out really well. I was 3 years old in September. The March before that, we moved to 701 North 12th Street and lived there the rest of the time I was in Heron, with the exception of the last year. And the last year, from 56 to 57, we lived in Rob's apartments. We got married, my wife and I got married in August of 56, and moved there and stayed there until we moved out of town. Now, my whole life in Heron, and my knowledge of Heron exists basically from 1935 to 1957. Many of you I recognize as being longtime Heronites. And I was telling my son about this, and my son said, "What is a Heronite?" And I said, "Well, you wouldn't understand, but anyway, that's people who spent a long time there and live there, and they know a lot of things about the town." All my knowledge, basically, even though I did come back while I was going to graduate school, and I did come back for vacations, things like that. So many of you know a lot more about this. As we went through the war, my father had two jobs, which he was the youngest of the family, and they did not draft him, and he worked at the ordnance plant at night out at Crab Orchard, and he worked at the station at day, aiding people who needed their cars to get to work. As some of you may remember, in World War II, everything was the war effort. Whatever you did, you sacrificed everything. Many coal miners sacrificed a lot. No safety regulations, no restrictions because of the war effort. And a lot of Americans in our country did that and worked at it. And my father worked continuously. And one good thing came out of that. He was a heavy smoker. And in 1944, he got pneumonia. And it just happened to be at the same time that I got the mumps. And my mother, it was a little bit before Christmas, and my mother was busy keeping me in bed with the mumps and taking care of Dad who had pneumonia. And I can remember Dr. Kane, Wendell Kane's father, coming, and I remember him telling Dad, he said, if you want to live very much longer, you're going to quit smoking. And my father said, okay. And he never smoked again. He just turned it off. Well, my mother tried to encourage him. He started gaining some weight, and she said, you need to get back to smoking. And he said, so he tried, she said, try Cools. That's what they were doing. So he lit up a Cool, and he and I happened to be at the station when he did this, and he said, why am I doing this? And he threw the Cool away, and he said, that's just terrible. The only thing, he violated smoking when he had grandchildren. And he got mad at me because I would not supply the cigars. I said, I'm not going to encourage people to smoke because I've had children. I'm not going to do that. And he said, but I've got a lot of friends who gave me a cigar one time. I've got to repay them. And I said, well, that's your business. And I'm not going to do it. So he and I had a great relationship in that respect, in that we were a lot like brothers, I think, rather than fathers and father and son. And he would do anything. People don't know this, but my father, it says up here in this article, hired high school kids, and he did. And one of his first employees was John Guido. Another one was Jack Cooper. Another one was, later on, was Jerry Hicks. One was Roby McFadden. And these people were to come in at 4 o'clock and stay till 6. And he would go home, and my dad was a fanatic on being clean with a dirty job. And he would come home, shower, and put on a new uniform and shave. He hated his red beard. He would shave in the morning, he'd shave in the evening, trying to get rid of that. He was very tough on himself. His shaving lotion was rubbing alcohol.
Oh,
And I've seen him, he and I were working together one day, and he said, I've got a toothache. I think I've got to go see the doc. He said, I'll be back. I said, okay. So his dentist was Dr. House, who was a World War I dentist. And my dad went up and said, I've got a bad tooth. You need to pull it. He said, okay, which one? So my dad sat down and put his finger there, and Dr. House pulled the tooth. No anesthetic, I mean, just reached up and pulled it out. And he said, I think you got the wrong one. Try this one. He came back to the station 20 minutes after he left, having had 2 teeth extracted. And it was just like nothing happened. He just went about his daily activity. He could just withstand a great deal of pain. But anyway, he had a lot of great friends. Some of you may not realize that a lot of people use this for a U-turn. Especially after the state came in and put the barrier down the middle. At one time, the state came in and put a barrier down the middle of the street, and to get around that, they would make a turn on Adams, left-hand turn, come up through this outer driveway, and go back and go the other way. Some of you remember when the Doughboy was in the middle of town, that also was a U-turn type situation. But this area had grass, as did a couple other areas, and he didn't like that grass. It was not enough to really bother with, but you had to bother with it. So he eventually got rid of all the grass and put rose bushes. Now, he was allergic to roses. And his eyes would run and his nose would run, and he would be out working in the roses and watering the roses. And a number of people came by and took cuttings from him and things of that nature. But he had a way of doing things which he had to tolerate discomfort and all to do them, and then he was able to do that. I was just thinking, living there at 701, living there at 701, I started running up to the high school. I don't know whether that's just one block away. The high school, many of you maybe cannot remember what it looked like, but it had a humongous front yard on the west side. At the corner of where the high school building, well, it's still there, but it had a sidewalk that went from one corner all the way up to the door. And then from over by Dr. Lewis's house, Mrs. Adams' house over there, came up to the front door. Great places to roller skate. You had metal roller skates that clipped on your shoes like a lot of us did. The sidewalks were very smooth and great places. And there was a humongous front yard and one big tree where the sidewalks came together. There was a big tree. And down on the north end, there was a whole row of poplars, and which provided shade when you wanted some place to cool off. And that was a great place to play ball. Ivan Lewis, some of you may remember Ivan Lewis, Mary Lewis's older brother, who eventually was an admiral, built model airplanes from scratch. He didn't go buy a kit and sand it a little bit. He bought the plans, the basic wood, laid the wood out, cut the pieces as they were supposed to be, glued them together, put paper over them, put an engine in it, and went up to the playground up there in the front yard of the school and flew these airplanes. What a lot of people didn't realize what was happening, he even got the first ramjet I'd ever heard of. And he had the ramjet would only fly about 10 or 12 seconds because the fuel capacity was so little. And so he would put in just, I don't know, a shot glass of fuel, and he would start that ramjet up. Oh, it was terribly loud. And it was the kind of jet engine and propellant system that the Germans used on their V-2 rockets. You remember in Germany they had no way of guiding anything. They just pointed them towards England and lit them, and they just flew and they made a horrendous sound. A ramjet is just a very loud sound, like a high speed fire. And he would fly it, he might get 10 or 12 revolutions. He was on a guide wire, and he would fly that jet. It was the fastest thing we'd ever seen. And probably the noisiest thing. Living at 701, as I look back on my grade school career, I learned a number of things in grade school that were of great help in working for my father. I didn't know that was going to happen, but you know, I had a great group of teachers. Some of you maybe remember some of them. But basically, what we were told and what we learned, one, be quiet. Only speak if you're spoken to. 2, take your hat off before going indoors. 3, open doors for women or girls. 4, girls and women always enter first. 5, the first name for every adult was either Mr., Mrs., or Miss. You never use I never did know most of my teachers' first names. They were either Miss or Mrs. Raise your hand for permission to talk. Now, my teachers included in the first grade a woman by the name of Miss Scarlett. And her job, basically for me, was to get me to sit in my chair. My first grade card was so bad that my mother went to school and they told her that, you know, they just couldn't get things across to me. Now we're only talking about 8 weeks. And as I said, I've never been around kids much. I've always been around adults. But anyway, mother ordered a set of books for me. I couldn't take my books home. It was against the school rules. They were afraid that they either wouldn't come back or damage. So for 8 years, my mother ordered a set of books, just like I had at school, at home. Now, I'm convinced that if she had done that, I would never have gone to college. I would never have done what I've done. Every evening after dinner, she and I spent a lot of time together. And as I got older in the junior high, early in the morning, sometimes there was a tug on my toe. Get up, do this over. It's not neat, and you got some errors. Do it over. And she kept after me to do that. When she no longer could help me with my schoolwork, she made sure that every Sunday morning I got up in time to go to Sunday school and church. So that, I think that was a big help. Anyway, I had Miss Scarlett, wonderful, sweet lady. Second grade, I had Miss Moore, who at the end of our school year, she joined the war effort. She became a Rosie the Riveter. Miss Ward replaced her, which I didn't have Miss Ward. The third grade was really a surprise, because the third grade was Mrs. Winnett, who actually had been Miss Scarlett. So she got us all again. Still had a great personality. When I started my graduate work at Southern, I walked into one of the guidance classes. I looked up, and there's Mrs. Winnett. We're going to work on our masters together. My mother passed away and I got my master's in '62. My mother passed away in '93. I was in town. I'm at Walmart, and I'm headed out of Walmart, and there's a lady with a scarf on her head sitting on a bench. And I started to walk by her, and I thought, oh my. And I got in front of her, and she said, "Hi, Jack." Long time ago. The fourth grade teacher was Miss Calcaterra, who started us playing softball. Fifth grade teacher was Miss Ruth Heron, who was a super person getting along with the kids. Christmas, fifth grade, 1945. Every student in her class got one piece of bubble gum and a pink rubber ball. And the pink rubber ball was really rubber, and that's something unusual in 1945. You bounced the ball against the floor, and it would hit the 11-foot ceiling and leave a spot on the ceiling. Some of the other teachers didn't appreciate that. Miss Aitman. Miss Aitman was our sixth grade teacher, and she had a slogan on the board that said, and she believed it, "Cleanliness is next to godliness."
Oh, yeah.
Somebody's heard that before. Mrs. McPhail, oh, by the way, to emphasize that, she passed fingernail files down the rows so we could clean our fingernails. Mrs. McPhail was the seventh grade teacher, and she taught Palmer method, so you know what that was. We were using wet ink with styluses, and it wasn't unusual to actually have somebody with a pigtail in front of you who got ink on their pigtail. That actually did happen in some cases. Miss Margaret Smith, who was our also a seventh grade teacher, we've started rotating around. In the sixth grade, we had 4 teachers, and Miss Smith taught music and math, and she was aided in the music part by Betty Boatwright. So you heard Betty Boatwright before. And then our 8th grade, my first person teaching the 8th grade was a man by the name of Fox. The second person that was there was a man by the name of Dickerson, who was there 1 year, our 6th grade year. The next 2 years, we had a person by the name of Clifford Paul Hooker, who was also the principal. But Mr. Dickerson, being there only 1 year, had a real effect on us. He taught us what a meter stick was. Nobody had heard of a meter stick. We had yardsticks. He had a meter stick. And the way he introduced it to us, as he was standing at his podium, he was teaching history. And he was watching, and he was putting marks down by names. And at the end of the class, it was a shock when he stood at the door with his meter stick, and he would look at you and say, "You get 2. Bang, bang." Now, what was really shocking, girls and boys. And I think that's why he was only there 1 year. I don't think people could really have him do that. Well, anyway, let me very quickly tell you what we found. In grade school, some of you are about as old as I am. You remember the war effort. You remember selling garden seeds, Victory Gardens. You remember selling paving bond stamps. Being an only child, I didn't tell you that, being an only child, only grandchild on both sides. And I saw my father's parents during the week and my mother's parents every Sunday. So if I had something to sell, my aunts and grandparents in Murfreesboro would buy them, and my grandparents and uncles in this town would buy them. And so we sold stamps, Victory Bond stamps. Remember those? And you'd end up with a bond. And my mother and father were encouraging people to do that so that I could go to college someday. Unfortunately, this business opportunity in 1945 came up, and my father needed some money. He took my bonds. And my mother and father always apologized, but there's no need to apologize because if something had to be done, and they took care of me anyway. So we recycle every Saturday. I can remember, not every Saturday, but various Saturdays we would walk up and down the streets. Some of you may remember that, you know, Lincoln's on the east side, north side was over on the northwest side, west side, south side, and we would have school contests, and we would walk up and down the streets. We'd collect newspapers, something that's really new now, recycling, you know, rags, grease. They collected grease. Everybody in here, and I think, fried stuff and had grease, and they wanted the nitrates for, and then of course anything that was metal. During this period of time, I want to throw out 3 or 4 names here. T.J. Creek, Ray Creek, Jiggs Jones, actually his name is Jinx, Itchy's father, Gene Venigoni, our Tex, as some people called him, and a person who was really, really important to our youth softball program, and getting it started and being involved, a fellow by the name of Father Bernard Monaghan. And he was a big, big help in that, and I remember my folks talking about him. Several of you were on teams that I'm familiar with. My father and your parents and all got involved. And so anyway, my father's concept of a service station was just that. It was service. Now, there was they built right down the block, 3 stores, they built an A&P grocery store. And we had some customers who shopped every Saturday morning, and they would pull into the parking lot and say hi and just walk off and leave their car. We knew they were going shopping, and we would park their car for them. But I don't know if you remember when service stations checked tires, checked radiators, checked batteries. The first batteries I checked were in the floorboard of cars in the back in the back seat floorboard and had a wooden lid over it. They were only 6 volts. Distilled water had to be used. You had to keep them from getting too hot by keeping the water in the batteries. Check the oil, clean the windows, pump the gas, and then maybe park the car until somebody else came along. In my dad's mind, that was service. During his period of time, we had some big changes. When he went down to that gas station, see if you can remember cars like we had at that particular time. We were talking about cars that were actually not really new designs. It wasn't time to design new ones quite yet. 45, 46, 47. You could see on the top the little crowns. When he moved there were 3 pumps, red, white, and blue. It was called Standard Oil. Some years later it became Amoco. The red crown was regular. The white crown, which later became gold crown, was the high octane. And by the way, I just saw these in the St. Louis paper. Here's a red crown. They're talking about antiques, and that's one of the big things now in antique shows and all, the various tops to these things. The blue crown was the one that was lead-free, and they finally got rid of that, and we only had red and white. The lead in the white, which became gold, went up higher and higher as we got more V8s that needed the Rocket 88. In the Oldsmobile in the late 40s, it wouldn't run if you didn't have the high octane. There were planes in World War II that flew on 100 octane gas. Well, we eventually got to very near that for cars that we were driving. All the cars basically used a 616 car, 16 tire. Tires didn't last more than 10,000 miles usually. Oil changes every 1,000 miles was not unusual. Some of you have cars that go who knows how long, 10,000 miles or 5,000 for an oil change. When we got to the station, one of the big things I remember happening was there were no oil filters on cars. And now, of course, that's just automatic, but that was one of the big changes. Then came the change in the oil. The first oil had no detergent. It was just oil. Then we got into the detergent oil, the Permalube, then the Super Permalube, which was multi-grade. And now, of course, you have all these oils that we have now, synthetic oil. Some people are saying 100,000 miles, or even a whole year on. So we went through all of that, and the thing that made it so enjoyable, really, being on that corner, all the people going by, was the people who lived in the apartments next door. And there's some names that you might recognize. These are people that I saw when I was working for my father. And by the way, that meant getting it in the summer when I worked for my father. That meant getting up at 5:15, either going to the Herian Coffee Shop or Illinois Cafe for breakfast by 5:30. That meant being and having the station open by 6 o'clock, so that anybody driving to work who needed to get some gas to work could get to work. And we'd be there. We'd have the station open. Eddie Carr and his wife Sharon lived next door. Bob White and Mel White lived next door. Joe and Edith Shannon, he was a very important United Mine Worker representative. Catherine Rowell, school teacher. Bill and Suzanne and Bill Payne ended up living there. So Dad started out living near Suzanne, and at the end, Suzanne lived near Dad. Well, we had a couple of friends. My father was a pitcher. He pitched for an all-black team out of number 9 when Satchel Paige came to town, and a barnstorming deal. And he had a catcher, black catcher, by the name of Webb from Colt. And then he would come up and talk to my father. My father came from Alabama when he was 10 years old, lived in a mining camp. Some of you have heard the song 16 Tons. And being owned by the company store, and that was my father's first 10 years. They lived in tents, and they kept them all segregated. He was with the Irish group, there was a Slavic group, there was a black group, and the company kept them separated so they wouldn't fight each other and get hurt. And so when they came up here, they pretty much lived the same way. And so the black people moved to Colt and lived out there near a mine, and everybody had to live close to a mine because when they first moved to this area, they couldn't drive to the mines. They had to walk to the mines. And Webb would come up and talk to my father, and they would talk about old days. And they would talk about the good ones and the bad ones, and they would both use the N word. And then when Webb left, and Webb, by the way, ended up working at SIU in the postal department, and Dad would always come over to me and say, "Don't you ever use that word. You've not lived with them, you've not worked with them, you've not played with them." He said, "You don't ever use that word. You don't deserve to use it. Only those of us who have been involved with our lifetime, we know the difference between good and bad." You may remember we were in college, my wife and I were in college, when Dick Gregory wrote the book Nigger. Dick Gregory is one of the funniest people I've ever been around. He became quite famous. But anyway, he wrote a book like that and got a lot of attention for it. Dad had one last thing. My father's customers, of course, most of them were local. But he had some people who came to town on business. Bill Sharp used to come from University City in St. Louis, and he was a Paramount movie seller. And he always had lots of stories. He really enjoyed it when Jerry Lewis and Dean Martin got together. And he was telling me that he sold movies, Paramount movies, to people based on a percent of money, percent of a dollar. So if whoever gave him the highest percent got to show it first. So if you would give him 80 cents out of a dollar, then he would let you have it if the other people couldn't go over that. With some of the Dean Martin, Jerry Lewis movies, competition got so bad that people actually paid him $1.05, $1.08, $1.10 for each dollar they took in because of the crowds they could draw with that particular thing. He was a Michigan fan. He thought Michigan was the greatest place in the world. Let's see, Jack Belcher. Some of you may have known Jack Belcher. I don't know. But Jack moved, my parents, my father and grandparents moved in. We went by there today on Pacific Avenue and lived in little houses there. Years later, a guy by the name of Jack Belcher lived in that house. And Jack was an interesting guy. He was a retired miner. And he drove from Pacific Street all the way to the Elks. And he spent all morning at the Elks when they were in the south end of town here. And he'd walk home at lunch. Now, I'm a young teenager who thinks that cars are the greatest thing in the world. And I say, "Now, Jack, what's going on here? Isn't your car good enough to haul you back and forth and you're trying to save on gas?" And Jack characterized himself as a bullshitter. And he said, "Well, you know, I'm retired, and I've seen a lot of people retire, sit in a rocking chair, and rust out. I'm not gonna rust out. So he would drive every morning to the Elks, play cards and do what he did, walk home at lunch, eat lunch, walk back to the Elks, and at 4 o'clock he could drive by. That was his routine. So he drove, did what he did, and yet got his walking in. So we had some interesting characters. I'm going to stop there and see if there's something that you want clarified or a question that you have about what's going on. And to me, it was my mother and father realized how much I enjoyed working at the gas station. And they were afraid that I was going to make the same mistake that they thought was a mistake. My mother had a chance to go to college and didn't do it. Dad had a chance to go and didn't do it. And they said, you're going to go. So they were afraid I was enjoying it too much. And I really did enjoy the camaraderie, the people, and the things that happened there at the station. It was right across, some of you may not realize it, but this is right across the street from City Hall. And my dad oftentimes, one morning, an example, one morning we went to breakfast, and it was a warm summer morning, and we had the windows down, and we went into the Illinois Buffet, and here's this round table, and 10 or 12 people sit there every morning, and the waitress knew who they were, what they wanted. You didn't have to order, you just sat down, and there it was. And it was different. And like I said, you know, they just tolerated me. I just sat there, I didn't say anything, I just watched. And my dad asked a couple guys, Dr. Wendell Payne would come, Lyle Artist was there sometimes, Newt Aronson was there. We had 8 or 9 or 10 people, and they came from all places in the city. And they all said, there's something wrong. There's something going on. What is it? And they all looked at each other and couldn't figure out what it was. And so my dad and I drove to the station. He said, you open up. He walked across the street to City Hall. Talked to the policeman. What had happened is during the night, somebody had burned a cross on the doughboy. And immediately, Heron had quite a clan group. And immediately, people in that group of people around that table and their neighbors began to look over their shoulders. Everybody knew who the clan members had been. And burning that cross, they took time out to look around. Things were just not right. Now, it's hard to explain to you if you haven't followed the same routine day after day, season after season, seen who's moving around, what's going on, what stores are open, or what's going on. If you haven't done that over a long period of time, then you don't understand the feeling. There's a feeling about things in the community before it actually opens up, and there it is. Well, anyway, fortunately, the police department found out before it got in the newspapers, before it caused a lot of consternation among people, that a couple young people had heard about race relations, had read in history about the Ku Klux Klan, had read about burning crosses, and they did it. Well, as soon as word got around that it was not the resurrection of the Klan, it was not adults against adults, it was some prank, then that kind of eased things up a lot. Now, it coincided, obviously, interesting enough, 2 young men in an English class at SIU Carbondale who were flunked by a Canadian professor burned a cross in his yard. Both boys were from the Altonwood River area, and they were suspended from school, kicked out of school. Which, again, brought quite a feeling in this particular area. So there were times that things happened that you could feel and would bring back old memories, some of them not very good, and it would get their attention. I grew up, let me tell a story on myself here as I finish here. In my lifetime, and my children had a hard time understanding this, I think, punishment was immediate. There wasn't anything, wait for this, or let's have a hearing to do this, or let's discuss this. Things happened quickly. Every teacher that I had in the 8th grades, on the first day, put a strap on the edge of the desk that first day of school. Every teacher that I had, no matter how nice they were. So I was used to that. My mother never ever said, if I did something wrong, you shouldn't have done that, I'll tell your dad and wait till he gets home. My mother never said that. She'd just say, bend over. My father said, if you ever have a problem at school, I better not find out about it, because when you get home, you'll get it again. Well, anyway, I was about 12 years old, coming by Lincoln Grade School. A woman lived in a farm there by the name of Mrs. Klink, and the city had put up no parking signs. Just galvanized metal, painted white, no parking in black, a couple nails through them into a 4x4 piece of wood. Okay? Safety measure. I'm walking by and I see that. I said, oh, these are brand new. And I take my fist and hand and I hit the back of one and it pops off. Well, that was kind of fun. So I went to the next one. I ended up having 2 of these signs. Now, what did I do with them? That was kind of goofy, but I put them in a storm sewer. Little did I know that looking out the window was Mrs. Klink. You've heard about neighborhood watch? There's no sign up warning you about that. You just expected that. I go home. I'm 3 blocks from home. I go home, and my mother says, without any explanation, your father wants to see you. What? I'm 12 years old. It's in the afternoon. What is this? So I said, okay. I always like to go to the station. So I jogged up to the station, 5 blocks away, got there, and he said, come with me. Okay. We went over to the corner where the city hall was and the old jail and the fire department was. Walked in that door. He hadn't said a word to me. Mother hadn't said a word to me. I don't know what's going on. And I'm going down the hallway, and the police chief is Big Boy Smith. And he's about this big, and he's got a gun about that big. Big guy who had a history of whipping a lot of people. And my dad said, here he is. And Big Boy looked at me and said, come with me. And what is going on? So we go down to a cell. He says, right in there. I went in that cell. He says, sit down. I sat down. He slammed that door. He says, do you know what you did? And I said, what did I do? I don't know. Well, you destroyed city property. You're a vandal. And I proceeded to get a very quick explanation of what I had done, why I shouldn't have done it, and what was going to happen if I ever did anything like that again. Less than 45 minutes after I did it, I'm in a jail cell. Very effective. Very effective. That's, if you've never done that, you need to visit a jail sometime and have them slam that door. It is, if you have any sense of freedom or don't want to be in jail, when that door slams, I used to take kids to Menard Penitentiary on a field trip. And it was just always spooky to me when they locked those doors behind me and I couldn't get out. And you had all kinds of people. In fact, I can't remember the young man's name, but one of the guards that I hooked up with, and we took 50 kids at a time, was from Heron. And I can't remember his name. He had been stabbed in a riot at Menard. And I should have remembered his name. But anyway, he and I had found out who we each happened to be, and we had a good time going through this. And he took us into the electric chair. You ever been next to an electric chair? We went into an electric chair, and we had one of these mouthy little kids with us. And he started bouncing around and saying things. There was a trustee in that room. He'd been sweeping up in that room. He was a black man, about 6'6", and his shoulders were about that wide. And he had arms that had weight training down there. And he was a humongous man. We didn't even pay attention to him. We weren't supposed to talk to him, recognize an inmate. This kid was doing this, and the guy with us said, would any of you like to sit in that electric chair? Out in the center of the room, the little thing they fit on the head's hanging there, straps on the arm of the chair, and the kids none of them moved. And this kid was kind of edgy and had been talking, kidding around, and this black guy walked over to him, picked him up, took him over to the chair, and set him in the chair. We didn't hear another word. All day long. That took care of that. Maybe some of those things should be done more often, I don't know. Anyway, I'm so grateful to have grown up in Heron, and for my parents and the experience. It just taught me to deal with people, taught me to, well, actually my school experience taught me a lot about that, in dealing with people and getting along with adults and providing service. And it just, I guess, this led to the natural consequence of me eventually being a teacher, I guess. Well, I've talked too long, as usual, which is something that I also learned, I guess. Do you have any questions?
Jack, I have a question back here. I want you to share with them about when you were 9 years old and they let you take the money to the bank with him.
Say that again. 9 years old? What?
When you were 9, that was a story you shared with me about being 9 and your father would give you the deposit to walk up the street.
Oh, yes. Oh, of course, yeah. Well, that went along with getting along with adults, I guess, because anywhere between, after 7 years of age, if I were at the station, he would put a financial deal, whether it's deposits or change or whatever it was, in a bag and say, take this to the bank. And I would go running up the street, and as I went around the corner, at that time it was Blankenship Parks, and then one time there was Kirkpatrick Oldsmobile I would pass, or later became Parsons Oldsmobile, then the A&P, and then Mazzo's Pontiac, Fredman's on the corner, and I'm at the end of 400, and I go across the street on 5 to the let's see, 4, that's 5, 200, and go up the street, and there was a Sears store, and there was another furniture store, and Davis Motors, and the Blue Front Cafe, and at one time there was a really nice pharmacy on the corner. Jack Cooper's uncle worked there, and after helping Jack Cooper deliver newspapers, I got a milkshake there. So I remember that place really well. Then I would go across the street there to the bank. There was a Mrs. Mercer. There was a Mrs. Turner. Goodwin was in there. Ed Goodwin, who I had known since I was, he lived near my grandparents out on the west end. We went by there a while ago as we went through a quick trip through my childhood where I hung out and all. Mr. Wittenberg, when I first started going, Mr. Wittenberg was at the bank. He lived at Caddy Corner for me on 12th Street. We went by there just now. His wife was a great pianist. His son was a great pianist. And in the summer, when our doors were open and I was required to take a nap every day to give my mother a break, but I would lay down in that bedroom and listen, and Mrs. Wittenberg and her son would be practicing, and they were just phenomenal. And so that was it. Mr. Hutchison. Bob Hutchison's father was there. CT was, let's see, anyway, when I would walk in the bank carrying this sack, I had at least two people say, "Hi, Jack." And whichever one wasn't busy, I would go there, and when I first started, I had to reach up to put it on the counter. I was that short. They would go through their business, and they would smile and say, "See you later, bye," and run off. And I never knew what was going on business-wise or anything. My father would go through it. If there was a mistake, either way, in his favor or against him, he would wrap it back up and say, "Ask him to do it again." And we did that. Then, of course, you all that lived around here long enough, you remember when the bank at Christmas time gave away big red Washington apples. I mean, they were humongous. I got 2 trips to the bank. One for Dad and one for me. They were just fantastic. But again, you know, it just, every place I went downtown, my mother was a great window shopper, and we would walk downtown, go into Woolsworth, Rose Rancilio. They lived right behind the station, and Rose and Johnny would walk through there while I was working. 2 other, the woodworkers, John and Charlie Spacia, walked through there. Lots and lots of memories for that. Does that,
Yes, thank you.
okay? Yes.
Maybe before we got here, did you explain any before about what the different pictures are? Because who the people
Oh, up
are,
here?
do we have names on them?
Oh, okay. Well, this is.
I know we can't all see, but
Yes.
we can come up later and know.
This is from something that was done here in 1992, and my mother had a copy of it. Charlie Jack. At age 5, I started hanging around the high school, and guess who took care of me? That man right there. To him, I became Jackie Boy. All the way through high school, all the way through grade school, he taught tennis. He ran a recreation program. We played tetherball, we played kickball, we had little archery sets, something we couldn't hurt ourselves with. The man is one of the greatest I've ever been around. He called me over one night. We played basketball game in Murfreesboro, and I played in the first game of the JV, and a kid had tried to shoot a layup, and I decked him, and we just didn't like people shooting layups on us, and I reverted to some linebacker techniques, And during the second game, I'm sitting in the bleachers. And he came over and sit down. He said, Jackie boy, don't ever do that again. You could hurt yourself, you could hurt him. It's not good sportsmanship. Do not do that again. The last time one of the last times we were playing, practicing, I was a senior, and our coaches thought we needed to practice downfield blocking. So he gave us the ball on the 20-yard line, and everybody else was on defense, and we had to score 5 touchdowns before we go home. We had to block all those people. There was another 25 people out there. And I had the ball, and a person got a hold of my toe, tripped me, and I fell down. And I'm near the edge of the track, and this person is walking by, and he says to me, Jackie boy, no one person should be able to do that to you. And he just kept walking. But if you knew Charlie Jack, that was enough for him to say something like that. He was just a super guy. He's on the Hall of Fame in McKendree. And this is just a collection of pictures of myself, baby pictures all the way through high school over here. This was taken by the Wallace family years ago. This is the 57, no, that's not it. It's the 53 group when we played at the Pyramid Tournament there. Let's see. This is something our daughters did for my wife and myself for our 60th anniversary, and it has all these pictures in there from high school and whatever, and very, very nice. This is my 5th grade picture and my father's picture. My father had red hair, as did his whole family. I had red hair when I was born, and it decided to change colors. I have 2 things here that we're leaving here with, has to do with the First Baptist Church, 100 Years in Music, which they put out, and my father, being a member of the church, got a copy, and my mother saved that. There are all kinds of pictures of people in there that, if you're a Haronite, you'll know who some of those people are. What else? Oh, this is a book from 1934 that went with that station. And whoever was there before my father, who took over in 45, left it. And I'm leaving that with the library also. There's names there that some people might recognize, and
Are those charge tickets, Jack?
what's that?
Charge tickets?
Well, this particular book is cash.
Oh, Pettis?
Yeah, and gas was anywhere from 3.3 cents to 7 cents. The sales tax on the gas was 3 cents a gallon, and the price of a quart of oil was 7 cents. So you could fill your car up, either gas or oil, and pay the tax for 75 cents. Yes.
Did he sell any gas on credit?
Oh yeah, my father did.
How did he keep track of the credit and everything?
Well, the book I couldn't find was one of those credit books. I've got one somewhere at home. 1948, and gas was 10.9. My father had a lot of friends that were coal miners, and most of them paid their bills while they were working. In the warm months, you know, I had teachers in high school who worked in the coal mines all winter, but they played football in the fall before it got cold, and they ran track after it got warm in the spring. The first track coach I had at Heron, Charlie Strauss, was a track coach, and he worked all summer in the farm fields and whatever, played at Southern, took him 6 or 7 years to graduate from Southern.
So they were people that he knew would be back at work and they would be paying
Oh, yeah.
for
And
them.
of course, he had
What
the,
about people in need?
he had the people all summer who were laborers and all, who were being paid for their weekly work. But in the winter, they didn't work. Or he'd have a farmer who planted in the spring and didn't harvest until the fall. My father had lots and lots of credit. I can tell you a story about that here in Heron, about doctors. A group of young doctors, the old doctors being Dr. Murrah, Dr. Kane, the old Dr. Kane, Dr. Duncan. They had just started the hospital, and a group of young people came in and said, we want to do away with credit, we want to do everything cash. And they'd been here for a little while and found out what it was like to carry people on credit. And Dr. Duncan said, if all the doctors will burn all their credit, then we will agree to go to cash only. And the people who wanted cash only wouldn't burn the credit they had. There were about 12 doctors involved. And that's one of the stories I heard at the station. You know, I knew the names and stuff like that, but again, I was nobody. I was just standing around and they were talking.
The other question I had, do you have any idea of the date or about what year the crust was burned on the Doughboy, when that happened? We have microfilm in the library, in the history room, that goes all the way back to 1913.
The time I'm talking about would have either been the summer of '53 or '52.
53, when we were juniors in high school. The next fall was the first year that we brought the Cub students into Heron High School. We were seniors, you remember? That was the very first year, so maybe, I don't remember anything like that.
Well, I told somebody one time that when I was a freshman in high school,
I don't remember.
Kabudi was our coach. And we went out to Culp to play a basketball game. I didn't know they had a high school in Culp. The room that we changed clothes in had dirt floors. And I would have bet half the people in Heron, if you talked to them on Main Street, did not know there was a school there. And yet they were paying taxes for it. It was part of the Heron Community School. But they weren't allowed in
Township
town.
High School though,
Yeah.
I mean, it was a township. It was
Yeah.
Heron only, it wasn't Chinnigo, wasn't Energy, wasn't
Yep.
Cove, it was just Heron.
So, you know, Earl Lee, in this article, which was done for the Belleville News Democrat on February 12th, 2007, would say that when he became the head coach and played Jefferson and Williams, that there were people who said things to him, who called him, and who were critical of him playing
Correct,
those two boys.
correct. But they
Now,
also said,
I had both of them, and as a student teacher, I taught at Heron the week after they won the state championship, which my wife and I got to attend that. But I did my student teaching, and I had Willie Williams and Jim Galdoni and Ivan Jefferson, and I played and box. Yeah, Jefferson and Tidwell played tennis. The funny story, Bob Hutchison and I volunteered to play John Tidwell, and I think it was Ivan, played doubles tennis.
From the old
And if you don't know John Tidwell very well, he's a ferocious competitor. Just very quiet, very calm, would not give up. He would not let us leave that tennis court until he had won a game against us. We were there till dark. And he just kept saying, no, not going in, not going in. I talked to him when they had the celebration here of that group.
Yes.
I hadn't seen him since that year in high school.
Oh, wow.
And I know he went to Michigan, and the Illinois coach had said, you can't play our style, we don't think you can play at Illinois. And he set records at Michigan and beat Illinois. And eventually a great player, Cassie Russell, broke his records. But I saw John at the Civic Center, and John was an introverted kid and always kind of withdrew from people. Looked to me the same as he always did. And I walked up next to him and asked him if he'd played any tennis lately. And he looked at me. And again, remember now, this is 50 years that I hadn't seen him, he hadn't seen me, and he started laughing. And we talked a little bit, and he's a medical research in North Carolina, and seems to really enjoy things, and very, very important person.
Jack, the colored kids come in our senior year.
Your senior
My
year?
senior year.
Yes, our senior.
That was it.
That was right at
Not
the
53.
That was a year after we
We
left
graduated in
school.
54, so it'd been 53, okay? You know how Kabuti was. You either played football or you didn't play basketball.
Yep.
And you can ask Ross Ferguson sitting back there. It was sad. Them kids never seen a football,
Yeah.
but they had to play football to play basketball.
Yeah.
And most of them were pretty good basketball players. But I don't think they got near a chance that first year or two.
Yeah, that's a possibility.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember well, that's why I played 3 sports 4 years in a row. You couldn't take any time off, or you couldn't play the next sport.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep. And you and I, we loved our football game. Didn't make a whole lot of difference to us.
No.
We liked football.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of kids, you know, and then, well, I shouldn't start this, I guess. You know, you either run track, and he took our baseball away from us, or my.
Basically, yeah, they lost interest.
So you could be out for track. Well, okay. That's
Could you tell us what Mr. Owens said about, when it was about, this is history, but,
Well,
about the
Marvin?
book, the Bloody Williamson book?
Yeah, I had him in class, and they were coming out with the book Bloody Williamson, and he encouraged people to sign a petition, and we sent it in, not to keep the book from being printed. We didn't like the cover on the book. He felt the cover was too bloody and too gory, and we didn't want to. But, you know, Herring was not a very nice place sometimes. My father had a gun with him all the time, as did many other businessmen. In fact, my wife and I had a boy tell us about that, how his father came and borrowed my father's gun because somebody in Herring was going to try to kill him. But the last big thing that I know about was a guy by the name of Tony Arms. Came by my father's station and said, I just robbed a bank in Kentucky. And my father, who had gone to school with him, said, don't tell me that. The police see your car over here, they're going to want to know what you told me. And Tony drove out to the north end of town, went into a tavern there, and when he came back out, somebody reached up over the fence and unloaded a shotgun through the windshield and killed Tony. And when we were in school, Blackie Arms was killed. Some people just walked in and shot the place up. Her father was a shoe shine person and working in a barber shop when a guy came in dressed unharronite, came in, went behind the barrier there at Jefferson Hotel, where I got my hair cut also from Clyde Proctor. Went behind this petition. There were several gunshots. The guy came out, got in the car and drove off. And somebody was killed back there. So there's been quite a bit of killing. And of course, my Uncle Osi was involved in the United Mine Workers. He observed part of what went on when they brought the people in from Kentucky. It's maybe some of the things that people think about Bloody Williamson is true. But what can you do about it? Ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Some of you that came in, if you didn't realize, we have a sign-up sheet here that we have to give to the library, and they let us use the room. We need to count. So if you, most of you signed in, but if you're new to it and you didn't know that, just sign your name. You don't have to put everything down, but please sign before you go out so we can have our count. And Cheryl, do you want to say